October 31st, 1993. Joaquin Phoenix's voice screaming into a 911 call. "Please come, he's having seizures," as his brother River convulsed outside the Viper Room. Everyone blamed Hollywood, but Joaquin knew the truth. River had been dying since he was 7 years old, since the night their family escaped David Berg's cult, where 4,000 children learned that abuse was called love. One of those survivors made a video confession before his death that exposed everything, and one survivor's name has never been revealed publicly until today. The story begins with a family that seemed destined for greatness, but first had to survive something no child should ever endure. The Phoenix family, Hollywood's most tragic dynasty. 1972. John and Arlen Bottom joined a religious group called the Children of God. They were idealistic missionaries seeking spiritual truth, hoping to make the world a better place. They had no idea they were walking into a nightmare that would haunt their family forever. These weren't naive kids. They were earnest seekers who believed in peace, love, and community. The Children of God, founded by David Berg in 1968, promised exactly that. Berg preached radical Christianity mixed with free love and communal living. To young people disillusioned with mainstream society, it sounded like paradise. The Bottoms threw themselves in completely, working as recruiters, traveling to South America to spread Berg's teachings, devoted, tireless, completely blind to what was happening around them. For 6 years, the Bottom family lived in communes across Venezuela, Puerto Rico, and Mexico. During those years, Arlen gave birth to 5 children: River, Rain, Joaquin, Liberty, and Summer. The kids grew up in a world most of us can't imagine. Homeschooled using cult materials. No television, no outside media, taught that the world beyond their communes was evil and corrupt. But there was something else happening in those compounds. Something that would scar River and his siblings for life. David Berg had begun publishing writings called Mo letters, supposedly divine revelations that became the cult's core doctrine. By the mid-70s, these letters had taken a disturbing turn. Berg explicitly promoted adult-child contact as an expression of God's love. Children in the communes were separated from their parents for long periods, placed in group homes, and exposed to material and situations no child should ever encounter. They called them sharing sessions. Children as young as 4 were photographed for cult publications. The cameras clicked. The adults smiled. The children learned not to cry. They were taught their bodies didn't belong to them. They belonged to God, which really meant they belonged to the adults in charge. River Phoenix was 4 years old when his family joined the cult. By the time they left, when he was 7, he'd experienced things that would torment him for the rest of his life. Years later, he would confide in close friends about the abuse he endured between ages 4 and 7. He described being subjected to inappropriate contact by adults in those South American communes. His younger brother Joaquin was just 3 when they escaped. Fragmented memories, flashes of strange adults, uncomfortable situations, and his older brother trying to protect him from things a child shouldn't have to face. But here's what makes this story even more heartbreaking. Arlen Bottom wasn't a monster. She was a mother who gradually began noticing disturbing changes. The group's teachings were becoming increasingly explicit about adult-child interactions. She started seeing things that didn't align with the spiritual community she thought she'd joined. Friends who knew the family during those years said Arlen began questioning, pushing back, protecting her kids as much as she could within the cult's strict hierarchy. And then, in 1978, she made the bravest decision of her life. The Bottom family fled, escaped in the night, left everything behind. Done with David Berg. Done with the Children of God. Done with the nightmare. When they reached the United States, they did something symbolic. Changed their last name from Bottom to Phoenix, a rebirth. Rising from the ashes of what they'd been through. They settled in Los Angeles, where the kids' natural talent for performing, honed by years of singing on streets for cult fundraising, caught the attention of Hollywood agents. River Phoenix became a star almost immediately. By his mid-teens, he was earning critical acclaim for films like Stand By Me and Running on Empty. He projected wholesomeness, intelligence, authenticity, vegan, environmental activist, a gentle soul who seemed untouched by Hollywood's usual corruption. His fans adored him. Directors trusted him. He seemed like he had it all figured out. But River was drowning in memories. He couldn't escape. Those years between 4 and 7 had left wounds that never healed. Friends from his later years described a young man who struggled with substance dependency, who seemed to be running from something he couldn't name. Nightmares, unable to shake whatever he'd seen in his dreams. He turned to substances as a way to quiet the memories, to forget what had happened in those compounds. The smiling, talented kid on screen was real, but so was the traumatized child underneath, desperately trying to outrun his past. That October night, River's younger brother Joaquin was with him. Joaquin was 19. River was 23. When River started convulsing on the sidewalk, it was Joaquin who called 911. If you've ever heard that call, you know the sound of a younger brother watching helplessly as his hero slips away. Joaquin's voice, desperate, terrified, breaking, revealed a young man who'd already lost his brother long before that night. He'd watched River struggle for years with demons neither of them could fully understand or escape. River Phoenix's passing at 23 wasn't just another Hollywood tragedy about fame and excess. It was the delayed cost of what the Children of God cult had stolen from a little boy decades earlier. The trauma River carried from ages 4 to 7 never left him. He just learned to hide it better, to perform normalcy while the nightmares festered inside. His family's escape in 1978 saved them from further harm, but it couldn't undo what had already been done. River got out of the cult, but the cult never got out of him. And River wasn't the only Phoenix child carrying those scars. All 5 siblings had been there, had seen things, had survived something that marked them forever. But what happened to the children who didn't escape early? The ones who stayed as Berg's teachings grew darker, more explicit, more criminal? Rose McGowan lived it. And what she survived makes the Phoenix family's story look merciful by comparison. Rose McGowan, the girl who refused to stay silent, 2017. Rose McGowan stood in front of cameras, fearlessly naming Harvey Weinstein as her abuser. She became the face of the MeToo movement. People wondered where this unbreakable courage came from. How does someone find the strength to stand up to one of the most powerful men in entertainment? You're about to find out. And it's not a story about bravery. It's a story about survival. If you survived what Rose survived as a child, Hollywood predators didn't seem so terrifying anymore. She'd already faced the worst humanity had to offer. By the time she was 9 years old, Rose McGowan had witnessed horrors that would break most adults. 1973, Certaldo, Italy. Rose was born to Daniel McGowan, an artist who'd joined the Children of God seeking spiritual community. Her mother, Terry, was equally devoted to the cause. Between ages 2 and 9, Rose spent her childhood in the cult's European compounds, including some of the most notorious homes in Italy. By the time Rose was living there, David Berg's teachings had evolved into something far darker than what the Phoenix family had experienced in the early 70s. Berg had issued increasingly explicit Mo letters by the late 70s. These weren't just troubling anymore. They were criminal manifestos promoting the abuse of children as divine practice. He wrote detailed instructions about how adults should interact with children in ways that violated every boundary of decency and law. Children in the European compounds, including the Italian homes where Rose lived, were being systematically victimized by the adults who were supposed to protect them. The Hogar homes, group residences for cult children, became places of unimaginable horror. Children as young as 3 or 4 were photographed for cult publications in compromising situations. They were subjected to what Berg called sharing sessions, which were actually organized abuse involving multiple adults. If a child showed distress, cried, or tried to resist, they faced punishment. They were told that refusing adult attention was rejecting God's love, that their pain was actually spiritual growth. Rose later revealed in interviews that she witnessed things that no child should ever see. She's been careful not to give graphic details, partly to protect herself, partly because the memories are too painful, partly because she knows the children who are now adults and still struggling don't need their trauma sensationalized. But she's made it clear. What happened in those Italian compounds was systematic, organized abuse of children by adults who used religion as justification. Her father, Daniel, to his credit, eventually began questioning what was happening. an artist, a creative soul who joined the cult seeking enlightenment. By the early 80s, he couldn't ignore what the children of God had become. 1982. Rose was 9 years old. The McGowan family fled, escaped to the United States, settled in Oregon, tried to build a normal life. But Rose couldn't escape what she'd seen and experienced. The trauma followed her. She grew up angry, rebellious, unable to trust authority figures. At 15, she ran away from home and became legally emancipated. Moved to Los Angeles, worked odd jobs, eventually stumbled into acting. By her early 20s, she'd landed the role of Tatum in Scream, becoming a rising star. On the surface, Rose McGowan was a Hollywood rebel, edgy, outspoken, refusing to play by the rules. What people didn't know was that her fearlessness came from a dark place. She'd been betrayed by the adults who were supposed to protect her when she was just a toddler. She'd learned early that authority figures lie, that institutions cover up crimes, that speaking up gets you punished. So when she arrived in Hollywood and encountered powerful men who abused their positions, she wasn't intimidated. She'd seen worse. When Harvey Weinstein assaulted Rose in 1997 at the Sundance Film Festival, she did what most victims do. She tried to process it privately, to survive and move on. But something inside her refused to stay silent. Unlike many victims who spend years blaming themselves, Rose had a different perspective. She'd spent her childhood being told that abuse was love, that her pain was her fault. She'd heard those lies before. She knew they were lies. 2 decades passed before Rose found her moment. When she became one of the first women to publicly accuse Weinstein, she didn't just speak up. She became a force of nature. Her famous statement, "You don't get to win this time," wasn't just about Harvey. It was about every adult who'd abused power over children in those Italian cult compounds. About David Berg and his Mo letters. About every person who'd told her that her violation was somehow divine. Rose McGowan's activism wasn't brave in the traditional sense. It was a survivor, refusing to be silenced ever again. She spent the years since continuing to speak out, writing books, creating documentaries, and helping other survivors find their voices. The little girl who grew up in cult compounds, who was taught that her body didn't belong to her, reclaimed her story. She turned her trauma into a weapon against the kind of men who'd destroyed her childhood. And in doing so, she gave hope to countless other survivors, both from the cult and from other forms of abuse, that speaking up matters, that they're not alone, that healing is possible. But Rose's voice became her weapon through external battles. For Joaquin Phoenix, River's younger brother, survival meant something entirely different. His battlefield was internal, silent, carried in every role he chose, every interview he avoided, every private moment he guarded. And the weight of what he couldn't save his brother from would shape him into one of Hollywood's most haunting performers. Joaquin Phoenix, the brother who carried the weight. 2012. Joaquin Phoenix vanished. His agent couldn't reach him. His publicist had no statement. Entertainment reporters speculated. Breakdown, rehab, spiritual crisis. For 6 months, one of Hollywood's most sought-after actors simply disappeared from the face of the earth. When he finally resurfaced, he told only one person where he'd been. Back to Venezuela. Back to the compound where it all started. He'd hired a guide, traveled to the exact location where the Bottom family had lived between 1972 and 78. He needed to see it, to face it, to prove to himself it was really over. The compound was abandoned, overgrown with jungle vegetation. The buildings where children had been subjected to Berg's abuse were crumbling, reclaimed by nature. Joaquin walked through those ruins alone. He was 37 years old, the same age his brother River would have been if he'd survived. He's never spoken publicly about what he felt standing in that place. But 6 months later, he accepted the lead role in The Master, playing a damaged veteran exploited by a cult leader. It wasn't a coincidence. Joaquin was born in 1974, 3 years old when the family joined the Children of God, 4 when they escaped. His memories of that time are fragmented. Flashes of communes, strange adults, uncomfortable situations he didn't understand. Unlike River, who was older and carried clear memories of the abuse he endured, Joaquin's trauma was more nebulous, harder to define. but he watched what it did to River. Saw his older brother struggle with substance dependency starting at 16. Witnessed the nightmares, the anxiety, the desperate attempts to self-medicate memories that wouldn't fade. Joaquin was the younger brother who couldn't understand why River was hurting but knew, instinctively, that something was deeply wrong. In interviews over the years, the rare ones Joaquin actually gives, he's been protective of his family, particularly his parents. He's emphasized that John and Arlen were young, idealistic people who made mistakes, but ultimately protected their children by leaving the cult. He's forgiven them for joining in the first place, understanding they couldn't have known what they were walking into. But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't bring River back. Look at Joaquin's career choices. They tell a story he rarely speaks aloud. The Master, a traumatized veteran exploited by a cult-like organization. Joker, an abused child who grew into a fractured, damaged adult. You Were Never Really Here, a trauma specialist rescuing trafficked children. Her, a lonely man who can't connect with real humans. Don't worry, he won't get far on foot. An addict trying to outrun his past. Every single role is a piece of the same puzzle. How does a child survive systematic abuse? How does trauma reshape a person? Can someone ever truly heal? These aren't just acting choices. They're Joaquin processing, through his art, what happened to his family. Each character is an exploration of the question he's been asking since he was 4 years old. Why couldn't I save him? 2014. A rare interview. Joaquin was asked about his parents' time in the Children of God. He said they were just trying to find their way. No anger in his voice, no blame, just understanding. But then, he added something that carried decades of grief. River didn't want to be here anymore in his final year. That single sentence contains everything. River didn't want to be here, not because of Hollywood, not because of fame, because the memories were too heavy. Because what happened when he was 4, 5, 6, and 7 years old had carved wounds that never stopped bleeding. Joaquin has spent 30 years trying to understand how his brother could be so talented, so loved, so seemingly successful, and still be drowning. And the answer, the one that haunts him, is that River never really escaped. The Bottom family fled Venezuela in 1978. They changed their name to Phoenix. They built new lives. But River was still trapped in that compound, still 4 years old, still being told that what was happening to him was love. Recently, Joaquin had a son with actress Rooney Mara. They named the baby River. Think about that for a moment. After all these years, after building his own extraordinary career and finding love, Joaquin still honors his brother by giving his son River's name. It's beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. The child Joaquin is raising will grow up safe, protected, cherished. Everything River deserved, but never fully got. Those who work with Joaquin describe him as intensely private, sometimes awkward in social situations, fiercely protective of his personal life. He avoids the celebrity machine as much as possible, doesn't do social media, rarely appears on talk shows. When he does speak publicly, it's usually about animal rights or environmental issues, causes River cared about deeply. In many ways, Joaquin has lived his life in his brother's shadow, not in a competitive sense, but in a memorial sense. Every choice he makes seems filtered through the question, what would River think? 2020. The Academy Awards. Joaquin Phoenix accepted the Oscar for Best Actor for his role in Joker. In his acceptance speech, he spoke about giving voice to the voiceless. The camera caught tears in his eyes. He didn't mention River by name. He didn't mention the cult. He didn't explain the tears. But everyone who knew, really knew, understood. He was thinking about a 4-year-old boy in a Venezuelan compound, about a 19-year-old on a sidewalk, screaming into a phone for help that came too late. About 30 years of carrying a weight that never gets lighter. Joaquin Phoenix, the brilliant actor who's won an Oscar and critical acclaim, is also the 19-year-old kid who couldn't save his brother. The 4-year-old who witnessed things no child should see. The 37-year-old standing in an abandoned compound, trying to make peace with ghosts. All of those versions exist simultaneously, and the only way he knows how to process it is through the characters he plays. Broken men searching for redemption, for connection, for a way to live with what they've survived. But what happened to the children who never got out? The ones born into Berg's inner circle, who knew no other world. 26 years. That's how long one child survived in complete isolation. And when he finally escaped, his first act was to sing about his prison. If these stories are giving you a new understanding of the hidden pain behind Hollywood's brightest stars, please subscribe to Golden Age Files. We uncover the truth behind the glamour, not to tear down the legends you love, but to honor the full complexity of their journeys. There are 3 more families to explore, and each story reveals how deeply the children of God cult scarred an entire generation. Christopher Owens, the rock star who escaped Berg's inner circle, 26 years. That's how long one child was trapped inside Berg's inner circle with no name, no identity, no hope. When he finally escaped at 26, he'd never seen a movie, never heard a Beatles song, never tasted freedom. His name was Christopher Owens. And his first act of rebellion? He became a rock star to sing about his prison. 1979, Miami. Christopher was born, but he barely remembers the United States. His parents were so devoted to David Berg's teachings that they lived in the cult's inner circle compounds, the most extreme, isolated communities, where Berg's most loyal followers raised their children according to his increasingly disturbing directives. While families like the Phoenixes were in South American outreach communes, Christopher's family was in Taiwan and Thailand, living in Berg's exclusive compounds where the rules were even stricter and the abuse even more systematic. Berg passed away in 1994, but his widow Karen Zerby and other leaders continued running the organization. For Christopher, that meant growing up in a hermetically sealed world, homeschooled using only cult materials, no access to television, radio, movies, or any outside media. Taught that the system, meaning the rest of the world, was evil, corrupt, and controlled by Satan. Everyone outside the cult was going to perish in the coming apocalypse, and only Berg's followers would be saved. Can you imagine never watching a TV show, never seeing a movie, never hearing pop music on the radio? Christopher's entire cultural reference point was cult worship songs and Berg's writings. He didn't know who the Beatles were. He'd never heard of Elvis Presley or Frank Sinatra. He had no idea what Thanksgiving or the 4th of July meant. His childhood was a complete blank, where normal cultural experiences should have been. But here's what makes Christopher's story particularly heartbreaking. He wasn't just isolated. He was trained from birth to be a cult musician. The children of God used music as a recruitment and fundraising tool. Children were taught to play instruments and sing worship songs, praising Berg and his law of love. Christopher showed natural musical talent, so he was groomed to perform, hours each day, practicing songs about David Berg's greatness, about the joy of communal living, about adult-child relationships being God's will. His gift for melody and songwriting was being used to promote the very system that was imprisoning him. 16 years old. Something dangerous happened. Another cult member had smuggled in a cassette tape, the Beatles' greatest hits. Christopher listened to it in secret, headphones hidden under his pillow at night. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Music could sound like this? Songs could be about something other than Berg and the cult? He became obsessed, hungry for more. Started seeking out smuggled tapes, the Smiths, the Rolling Stones, anything he could get his hands on. It was an act of rebellion that could have resulted in severe punishment. In the cult's re-education centers, teenagers caught questioning leadership were isolated, subjected to exorcisms, and psychologically broken down until they submitted. But Christopher was careful, kept his growing awareness hidden. As the years passed and he entered his 20s, he started planning an escape. But how do you leave when you have no ID, no education, no understanding of how the outside world works? 26 years old, Christopher had never filled out a form, never used an ATM, never ordered food in a restaurant, never applied for a job. The prospect was terrifying. 2005. With the help of a sympathetic cult member who'd been secretly questioning the organization themselves, Christopher fled, made it to Amarillo, Texas, with nothing. No money, no documents, no skills for the modern world. 26 years old but functionally helpless. Didn't understand basic social interactions. Had never chosen his own clothes. Had no concept of bills or rent or how to navigate a city. That's when he met Stanley Marsh, an eccentric art collector and patron who saw something special in Christopher. Stanley took him in, became a mentor, and helped him adjust to freedom. Stanley introduced Christopher to movies, television, art, literature, all the cultural touchstones he'd missed. And Stanley funded Christopher's music career, recognizing that the young man's gift for songwriting could be his path to healing. 2009, Christopher formed the band Girls and released their first album. Critics raved about the nostalgic sound, the haunting melodies, the lyrics that seemed to ache with longing for something lost. They had no idea what they were hearing. Every song Christopher wrote was processing 26 years of lost freedom. The nostalgia wasn't for the 1960s. It was for the childhood he never had, the adolescence that was stolen, the young adulthood he spent locked away from the world. Songs like Lust for Life and Hellhole Ray Trace weren't just catchy indie rock. They were a cult survivor's testimony. When Christopher sang about feeling trapped, about wanting to escape, about searching for something real, he meant it literally. The music became his therapy, his way of processing decades of captivity. But here's the tragic irony. 2012. Just a few years after starting the band, Christopher disbanded Girls. He told interviewers that creating music had become too connected to his trauma. Every time he wrote a song, he had to revisit the cult. Every performance forced him to access those 26 years of pain. The thing that had helped him heal was also keeping him trapped in the past. He needed to stop making music to truly move forward. Christopher Owens' story shows how deeply the children of God damaged even those who escaped. He got out at 26, but the cult had stolen his entire childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood. He's had to learn, as an adult, all the things most people absorb naturally growing up. Simple things: understanding pop culture references, knowing how to make small talk, navigating social norms, are challenges for him. The 26 years he lost can never be recovered. He can build a new life, which he's doing, but he can't get back the one that was taken. Christopher Owens was born into the cult with no choice. His parents chose David Berg. But what about the children of David Berg himself? The man who created this nightmare? What happened when his own family discovered the monster behind the prophet? What happened when Berg's own son realized the truth? That answer is coming, and it's the darkest chapter yet. One of Berg's children would take the most extreme revenge, and his final act would expose everything. The Berg family. When the prophet's own children spoke out, David Berg presented himself as a messianic figure bringing God's love to the world, wrote thousands of pages of Mo letters describing his divine revelations, built an organization that, at its peak, had over 10,000 members in 90 countries. He convinced thousands of parents to hand over their children to his communal homes, trusting that Berg would provide spiritual guidance and safety. But here's what those devoted followers didn't know. David Berg was abusing his own children and grandchildren, practicing in private what he preached in public. Berg's granddaughter, Mary Berg, who later took the name Mary Jaqua after escaping, would become one of the most important witnesses in exposing the cult's crimes. 1979, Mary was born, raised in Berg's inner circle by her mother Faithy, who was Berg's daughter from his first marriage. Berg's control over his own family was absolute. His daughters and grandchildren lived in compounds with him, subjected to his criminal behavior, while being told it was divine love. Berg's own daughters later testified that he victimized them throughout their childhoods. One of his daughters, Deborah, left the cult and gave detailed accounts of years of systematic abuse by her own father. Berg didn't just create a system that enabled the abuse of children. He practiced it on his own family first, then expanded it to all the children under his control. His son, Ricky Rodriguez, born 1975, groomed from birth to be the cult's next leader. Berg and his second wife, Karen Zerbe, called Ricky the Prince and raised him in their inner circle. But Ricky's childhood was a nightmare. He was subjected to abuse by multiple adults, including his own mother, Karen, and Berg himself. This wasn't hidden or secret within the inner circle. It was documented. The cult actually published photographs and writings about Ricky's childhood, presenting his victimization as an example of God's love for other cult members to emulate. Think about that for a moment. The cult's founder was abusing his own son and documenting it as religious instruction. It's almost impossible to comprehend the level of depravity and manipulation involved. Mary Berg grew up witnessing all of this, saw her grandfather victimize his own children and grandchildren while preaching about divine love, experienced firsthand the cult's complete disregard for children's safety and well-being. And as she grew older, she began to understand that what had happened to her wasn't divine. It was criminal. Leaving the cult for Berg family members was especially dangerous. They couldn't just walk away quietly. They knew too much, had witnessed too much. The cult leadership, including Karen Zerby, who took over after Berg passed in 1994, would do anything to keep them silent. But Mary found the courage to escape in the early 2000s, left the only life she'd known, and went to authorities with her testimony. She gave detailed accounts of Berg's abuse of his own bloodline, described the inner workings of the cult's child exploitation system, named names, provided dates and locations, corroborated the testimonies of other survivors. Her bravery was extraordinary. She was betraying her own grandfather's legacy, exposing her own mother and other family members who'd participated in or enabled the crimes. But she knew the truth needed to come out. The cult's response was predictable but chilling. Denied everything. Produced slick videos claiming that former members were lying, that the stories were exaggerated, that Berg had been misunderstood. They painted Mary and other escapees as vindictive, mentally unstable people seeking attention. But Mary's testimony, combined with dozens of other survivors coming forward, was too detailed and consistent to dismiss. Investigations were launched in multiple countries. Child protection agencies started looking into the cult's current operations. Several nations banned the organization or placed strict oversight on their activities. The Children of God was forced to rebrand as the Family International and publicly disavow some of Berg's most explicit writings about adult-child contact. But the most tragic part of this story involves Ricky Rodriguez, Berg's son. 2001. Ricky left the cult at age 29. For the first time in his life, he was free to process what had been done to him. And what he discovered was that he couldn't live with the memories. The abuse he'd endured from birth had damaged him in ways he couldn't repair. He was angry, not just at Berg, who'd passed away 7 years earlier, but at all the adults who'd participated in his victimization, particularly his nanny Angela Smith, who'd been one of his primary abusers during childhood. January 2005. Ricky made a disturbing video, sat in front of a camera, and calmly described what had been done to him as a child, named the people responsible, explained that he couldn't live with the pain anymore, and he was going to do something about it. The video was a goodbye, and a testimony rolled into one. Then Ricky tracked down Angela Smith, the woman who'd abused him when he was a small child. He ended her life. Then he drove to Arizona and ended his own life in a parking lot. 29 years old. His final message said simply that he couldn't live with the memories anymore, that the trauma of his childhood had destroyed his ability to function in the world. But Ricky's final act wasn't just destruction. His video confession became the evidence that would help investigators finally understand the full scope of what Berg had built. The testimony of a dead man became more powerful than anything the living could say. Ricky Rodriguez's tragedy became international news. Suddenly, people who'd never heard of the Children of God were learning about the systematic abuse of children in religious cults. His final video, which was released posthumously, became evidence in ongoing investigations, and his loss of life showed the world that escape doesn't always mean survival. For some victims, the damage is too profound to heal. Mary Berg, meanwhile, continues to live quietly, having given her testimony and helped authorities understand the full scope of what happened. Berg's other grandchildren and family members have scattered, some still in the cult, some out and rebuilding their lives. The family legacy that David Berg created is one of multi-generational trauma, destroyed childhoods, and a level of betrayal that's almost incomprehensible. David Berg harmed his own children, then built a system that allowed thousands of other children to be victimized. And when his own grandchildren tried to hold him accountable, he was already gone, having passed without ever facing justice for his crimes. We've now heard from the famous survivors, the Phoenix family, Rose McGowan. We've heard from the inner circle prisoner who lost 26 years, Christopher Owens. We've heard from Berg's own bloodline, Mary and Ricky Rodriguez. But what about everyone else? What about the thousands of children who weren't famous, weren't connected to Hollywood, weren't related to Berg? The forgotten ones who suffered in silence while the world looked away. These stories are difficult to hear, but they're essential to understanding the hidden costs of unchecked religious organizations. Which revelation has affected you most deeply? And what other Golden Age Hollywood secrets should we uncover? Leave a comment below. Your voice matters in preserving these important stories. The forgotten children, survivors still breaking silence. Here's a number that should haunt you. By 1980, the Children of God cult had approximately 10,000 members worldwide. Roughly 30 to 40% were children. You already know the math. That means thousands of children were growing up in these compounds, experiencing what River Phoenix, Rose McGowan, Christopher Owens, and Ricky Rodriguez went through. But most of them didn't become famous actors or musicians. They were just kids, invisible to the outside world, suffering in silence, 14 years old. Celeste Jones woke up in a room the size of a closet. The Victor Camp guards had put her there 3 weeks ago for asking too many questions. The room had no windows, one dim bulb, a mattress on the floor, and a stack of Berg's writings she was forced to copy by hand over and over until she could recite them from memory. This was her re-education. During the day, she copied. The law of love is God's ultimate commandment. Children who resist are filled with the spirit of rebellion. Rebellion is Satan's tool. Her hand cramped. The words blurred together. But if she stopped, if she showed any defiance, the punishment escalated. At night, the adults came. They'd physically restrain her, hold her down while they screamed that demons were being cast out. They told her she was possessed by evil spirits, that her resistance was Satan himself trying to destroy God's work. The exorcisms lasted hours, her throat raw from crying, her mind fracturing under the psychological assault. 3 weeks became 3 months. By the time they let her out, Celeste Jones had learned the most important lesson of the Victor camps. Survival meant silence. Compliance, the complete erasure of self. She was one of hundreds of forgotten children who endured Berg's punishment system, and she waited 30 years before anyone believed her story. The Victor camps were the cult's answer to children who questioned leadership or showed signs of wanting to leave. Teens as young as 13 were imprisoned in these facilities, cut off from their families, and subjected to systematic psychological torture. The goal was simple: break their spirits completely, make them compliant and obedient, erase any thought of escape. Celeste's sister Christina wrote about these experiences in their memoir, Not Without My Sister, published in 2007. The book detailed not just the Victor camps, but the detention teen homes, facilities specifically for older teenagers the cult deemed rebellious. These weren't boarding schools. They were prison compounds. Teens were watched constantly, their mail censored, phone calls forbidden. Any attempt to contact the outside world resulted in immediate transfer to a Victor camp. Another survivor, Juliana Buring, described the sharing schedule in her own writings, a systematic rotation where children were made available to adult members for inappropriate contact. The adults kept calendars. They traded children among themselves like property, scheduling who would have access to which child on which days. It was organized, documented, treated as normal within the cult's twisted theology. When Juliana finally escaped in her 20s, she couldn't read beyond a 5th grade level. The cult's education had been deliberately inadequate. Keeping children ignorant made them easier to control. She struggled with basic math, couldn't write a coherent essay, had no understanding of history or science beyond Berg's writings. She'd spent her entire childhood and adolescence being systematically victimized while being taught that the outside world was evil. These survivors, Christina, Celeste, Juliana, and dozens of others who've come forward, tried to tell their stories in the 1980s and 90s, but they were dismissed. Who were they? Nobody famous, no platform, no celebrity to give their testimonies weight. Authorities in various countries would occasionally investigate the children of God, but the cult had become experts at covering their tracks. They'd move compounds when scrutiny got too intense, rebrand their materials to sound less explicit, present a wholesome face to the outside world while the abuse continued behind closed doors. Many survivors attempted to bring legal cases, but prosecuting crimes that happened in foreign countries, sometimes decades earlier, proved nearly impossible. Evidence had been destroyed. Witnesses were scattered across continents. The cult had resources, lawyers, PR campaigns, connections with local officials who they'd cultivated over years. The forgotten children lost every battle until they found each other. The shift came gradually in the 2000s. Documentaries started being made. Online communities formed where former members could share their stories anonymously, realizing for the first time they weren't alone. One survivor would post their experience on a forum, and dozens of others would respond with eerily similar accounts. The patterns became undeniable. This wasn't a few isolated incidents. This was systematic, organized abuse of thousands of children over decades. The 2007 documentary, Children of God, Lost and Found, was particularly important. It featured interviews with multiple survivors from different countries and time periods, all describing identical practices. The documentary showed the cult's own publications, Berg's Mo letters, with their explicit content about adult-child contact, photographs from cult materials, internal memos discussing how to avoid legal prosecution. The evidence was overwhelming, and finally, people started listening. But here's what truly changed the narrative. When Rose McGowan became famous for her MeToo activism, and when Joaquin Phoenix started choosing roles that indirectly referenced cult trauma, it created space for the forgotten survivors to be heard. If River Phoenix's brother was still processing this trauma decades later, if Rose McGowan's fearlessness came from cult survival, then maybe all these other survivors telling similar stories were telling the truth too. Celebrity gave credibility to the voiceless. Fame opened doors that had been slammed shut for 20 years. The Children of God officially changed its name to the Family International in 2004, trying to distance itself from Berg's legacy and the mounting testimonies. They implemented some reforms under intense pressure, discontinuing the most explicit of Berg's writings, implementing oversight for children, allowing more contact with the outside world. But former members point out that the core leadership remained the same. Karen Zerbe, Berg's widow, who'd participated in Ricky Rodriguez's abuse, was still in charge. The same people who'd run the cult during its worst years were still running it under a new name. Today, the Family International claims only a few thousand members, down from their peak. Many compounds have closed. But survivors' organizations estimate there are still thousands of former Children of God members worldwide, many still struggling with PTSD, substance dependency issues, relationship difficulties, and the challenge of integrating into a world they were taught to fear. The forgotten children, the Celestes and Christinas and Julianas, found their voices through each other, created networks, wrote memoirs, gave testimonies to investigators, and slowly, painfully, began to heal. Many credit the famous survivors like Rose and the Phoenix family with giving them hope that people would believe them, that their suffering mattered, that they weren't just casualties of a system too big to fight. But there's still one question that needs answering. What do we do with all this knowledge? How do we make sure this never happens again? And where are these survivors now? Not just surviving, but living. The legacy, what these families teach us. Joaquin Phoenix is 49 years old now, married to actress Rooney Mara, and they have a son named River. He guards that child's privacy with a ferocity his own parents couldn't muster when they were young and naive and caught up in a dangerous cult. He knows what his parents didn't in 1972. Charismatic leaders who promise utopia always start the same way. Love bombing, overwhelming acceptance and affection, then slow isolation from outside influences. Family, friends, media. Then the gradual introduction of extreme beliefs, wrapped in divine language, enforced through peer pressure and fear. Joaquin rarely gives interviews, almost never discusses his personal life, and keeps his son completely away from the public eye. Every choice he makes as a father seems designed to give his child the safety and normalcy that was stolen from him and his siblings. Rose McGowan, now 50 years old, learned young that when someone tells you God wants you to violate your instincts, that's not revelation. It's manipulation. Berg convinced parents that adult-child inappropriate contact was divine love. He used religious language to normalize criminal behavior. Rose's activism isn't just about Hollywood predators. It's about recognizing that same pattern everywhere. Abusers who cloak themselves in authority, whether that's religious leadership, corporate power, or fame. She's written books, created documentaries about cult survivors, and become a voice for those who can't speak up themselves. But she's also sought therapy, built a chosen family of close friends, and learned to create boundaries. The fearless warrior who took down Harvey Weinstein is also a woman actively working on her own peace. Because survival isn't just about escaping, it's about rebuilding. The Phoenix sisters, Rain, Liberty, and Summer, have built quiet lives away from the spotlight. Rain runs a charitable foundation. Liberty works in environmental advocacy. Summer keeps her life private. They gather together for family occasions, bonded by shared trauma, but also by shared survival. They rarely discuss the cult years publicly, but friends say they've found ways to process what happened through their chosen work helping others. Rain's foundation focuses on organizations that protect vulnerable children. Liberty's environmental work honors River's memory and his passion. Summer has simply chosen peace and privacy. Each sister found a different path to healing, and that's the point. There is no single path. Christopher Owens stepped away from music in 2012 and now lives a private life. He spent 26 years trapped in Berg's inner circle with no access to the outside world. When he finally escaped, he had to learn everything: how to use an ATM, how to order food in a restaurant, how to navigate basic social interactions. He's focused now on his own healing, exploring the world he missed while trapped in the cult, and building a life based on freedom and choice rather than trauma and survival. Simple things most people take for granted: watching movies, listening to music he chooses, wearing clothes he likes, are still acts of rebellion for him, still celebrations of freedom. The Berg family descendants who escaped have scattered. Some work in anti-cult advocacy, using their insider knowledge to help identify and stop similar organizations. They know the warning signs because they lived them. They know how groups separate children from parents, how they justify breaking normal boundaries, how they punish resistance. Others have changed their names and live anonymously, trying to escape the shadow of their grandfather's crimes. Mary Jacqua continues to speak with investigators when needed, but otherwise maintains her privacy. She gave her testimony. She helped expose the truth. And now she's trying to build a life that isn't defined by what was done to her. Because that's what all these survivors are doing, refusing to let their trauma be the only story. River Phoenix's passing at 23 was a tragedy. But his life, short as it was, had meaning. He brought joy to millions through his performances. He advocated for causes he believed in. And his story, combined with his brother's ongoing journey and Rose McGowan's activism, has helped shine light on the hidden horror of the Children of God cult. Rose McGowan's courage didn't just help bring down Harvey Weinstein. It showed every cult survivor that speaking up matters, that your voice has power, that the adults who harmed you don't get to win forever. Christopher Owens' music, brief as his career was, gave voice to lost childhood in ways that resonated with people who'd never been in a cult but understood, feeling trapped, seeking freedom, mourning what should have been. And the Berg family whistleblowers, Mary, and others who testified against their own grandfather's legacy, helped investigators understand the full scope of what happened, preventing some children from experiencing similar abuse. Today, organizations like RAIN, Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and various cult survivor support groups work to prevent future tragedies and help current survivors heal. Former Children of God members have created their own support networks where they share resources, therapy recommendations, and most importantly, understanding. Nobody knows what it's like to grow up in a cult except someone else who lived it. That shared experience becomes a lifeline, a reminder that you're not crazy, that what happened was real, that healing, though slow and painful, is possible. Laws have evolved too, though slowly. More countries now have specific legislation addressing abuse in religious organizations. Child protection agencies have better training to recognize cult dynamics. And slowly, the stigma around cult survivors is lifting. People are starting to understand that joining a cult doesn't make you stupid or weak. It makes you human, seeking connection and meaning in a confusing world. The Bottoms weren't naive fools. They were idealistic young people who believed in peace and community. They just didn't know that predators often use those exact values as bait. But here's what Joaquin Phoenix, Rose McGowan, and all these survivors want you to understand. Healing isn't linear. It's not a destination you reach. River Phoenix didn't escape his trauma. His life ended at 23. Ricky Rodriguez couldn't live with his memories and ended his life at 29. But Joaquin found a path through acting and fatherhood. Rose found healing through activism and speaking out. Christopher found it by walking away from music and building a quiet life. Celeste and Christina Jones found it through writing and advocacy. Mary Berg found it through testimony and then privacy. There's no single path to healing. And for some, the wounds are too deep to ever fully close. That's not weakness. That's the reality of severe childhood trauma. What matters is the choice to keep trying, to build a life, to refuse to let the abuse be the final word. These families weren't destroyed by the Children of God cult. They were wounded, some mortally. But those who survived didn't just endure. They found ways to turn their pain into purpose. That's not redemption for what happened to them. Nothing redeems systematic child abuse, but it is resilience. It is the human spirit, refusing to be crushed completely. If this documentary has opened your eyes to a hidden chapter of Hollywood history, please like this video and share it with friends who care about protecting vulnerable children. These survivors chose to tell their stories publicly so that others might be spared. Let's honor their courage by spreading awareness. Together, we can ensure that what happened to the Phoenix family, Rose McGowan, and countless others never happens again. The Children of God cult may have changed its name to the Family International and implemented reforms, but thousands of survivors are still processing trauma inflicted decades ago. The famous families we've explored, the Phoenixes, Rose McGowan, Christopher Owens, and Berg descendants, use their platforms to shine light on this darkness. But they represent just a fraction of the children who suffered. As we remember River Phoenix, let's not reduce him to a cautionary tale about Hollywood excess. He was a cult survivor whose life ended before he could fully escape the nightmares of his childhood. Rose McGowan's fearlessness wasn't born in Hollywood. It was forged in Italian cult compounds, where she learned that speaking up is the only weapon against those who abuse power. Joaquin Phoenix's intensity on screen reflects the weight he's carried since he was 4 years old, watching his older brother struggle with demons neither could name. These weren't just famous people with interesting backstories. They were children whose families sought spiritual community and instead found organized abuse. Their stories remind us that evil often cloaks itself in the language of love, and that the most vulnerable among us, children, need our vigilance and protection above all else. So watch for the warning signs. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Support survivors when they speak up, and remember that healing is possible, even when the wounds run impossibly deep. These families proved it. They survived. They built lives. They found meaning. And by sharing their stories, they've protected countless children who will never know the nightmare they were spared. But there's one more story we haven't told. Remember at the beginning when we said one survivor in this story has never been named publicly until today? That person's identity, their connection to the cult, and why their story remained hidden for so long. That revelation is coming. And it involves someone whose face you know, whose work you've admired, but whose past has remained completely secret. That story will be told next week, because some secrets are too powerful to reveal all at once. Thank you for watching, and for caring enough about these survivors to hear their truth. These weren't easy stories to tell, but they're essential ones. Until next time, this is Golden Age Files, uncovering the stories Hollywood tried to bury, honoring the full complicated humanity of those who lived them.